We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.
Hey Slate listeners, I'm Christina Cauterucci, the host of Slow Burn, Gays Against Briggs. I want to tell you about a special event we're doing at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City on June 13th. To celebrate this new season of Slow Burn and Pride Month, we're hosting an exclusive live taping of the show with special guests, including civil rights activist and Black Lives Matter organizer DeRay McKesson, comedian and singer Esther Fallick, Eric Marcus, the host of Making Gay History, and Sam Feder, director of the Netflix documentary Disclosure, about the depiction of trans people in film and television. We'll dive deeper into this season and talk about the lasting impact of the Briggs Initiative and the continued fight over LGBTQ rights in schools. It'll be the perfect way to celebrate Pride Month this June with LGBTQ stories and voices across generations. Again, that's June 13th at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York. You can get tickets now at tribecafilm.com/slowburn. Hope to see you there.
Jamie, how would you describe the FDA's relationship with Juul, the e-cigarette company?
In a word, contentious is what I would say.
Jamie Ducharme is the author of Big Vape, the Incendiary Rise of Juul. And we called her up because last week, the FDA basically wrote her book a whole new chapter. That's because 2 years after banning Juul, the trendy e-cigarettes that caught on with teens a few years back, the FDA said, scratch that. The ban is lifted. This decision came as a surprise to me. But Jamie says she's gotten used to a certain amount of flip-flopping from the FDA.
I think it's worth noting, too, that for Juul's first few years in existence, the FDA took absolutely no approach at all towards them. Like, they were not regulated whatsoever by the FDA for their first few years on the market. So truly, we have been all over the map.
I feel like I'm in a maze here. Like,
welcome to the world of Juul. Yes, it's always like this.
America's largest e-cigarette maker is under fire this morning. One state now.
If you're like me, you first became aware of Juuls and juuling because of TV news.
And with flavors like Fruit Medley and Cool Mint, it's no surprise teens are getting caught juuling in school bathrooms, libraries, even under their classroom desks.
Eventually, it was not just the FDA cracking down on Juul.
Today, the Massachusetts Attorney General said she's uncovered the strongest evidence to date that e-cigarette giant Juul targeted children in its online advertising campaigns. In a lawsuit.
But over the years, with the FDA's help, Juuls, they've kind of fallen off the radar. Okay, real talk. Does anyone Juul anymore?
They do. Far fewer people than, let's say, 2018, 2019, when the company was just this massive cultural phenomenon worth almost $40 billion. But I think if you stopped somebody on the street and asked them to name a vaping company, and, if they're not a vapor themselves, I feel pretty confident that Juul is the name that they would come up with.
The people behind Juul, they want to be dominant again. That means convincing the FDA that their product is about more than just getting kids hooked. Convincing the FDA that Juul might, in fact, help adults ditch cigarettes. Now that Juuls are unbanned, the question is whether the FDA is buying their argument.
The fact that the FDA is willing to give Juul this second chance, to me, is a hint that the agency is at least open to a world in which e-cigarettes are authorized and regulated and used as part of a tobacco control strategy.
What a long road to get there.
Truly a long road, yes. And it's not over.
Today on the show, is juuling still a bad word? I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Discover. When it comes to your finances, Discover wants you to know they are the credit card that is always there for you. With 24/7 U.S.-based live customer service, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We are talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity. Much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier, and it could help you save, too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, or even hitting the home gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Do you remember when e-cigarettes or vapes first hit the market?
They first started trickling out around 2010. Back then, they were very different than, the Juuls and the disposables that you see today. They were either these huge, really clunky, really complex systems, or they were kind of gimmicky and designed to look like traditional cigarettes.
I still remember those, the ones that glowed red at the end.
Yeah, and they would sell them in kiosks at the mall. It was this very kind of gimmicky, shticky industry at the beginning, and then of course really took off in the decade or so after that.
When did the panic about vaping set in? I keenly remember it, the kind of TV news story of Juuls are here and they're in your middle school, that sort of thing. When did that happen?
I would say that started in around 2017 to 2018, but it really hit a fever pitch in 2019 for a couple reasons. One being just that it was super popular. Data showed that about 27.5% of high schoolers vaped. Not all Juul, but Juul was the most popular at that time. So that's a huge number. I mean, for context, cigarette smoking has been in single digits among high schoolers for a very long time. So that number was super alarming. But then the other thing that happened in 2019 is there was, you may remember, this mysterious lung disease crisis, which was later called Diwali. At first, nobody knew what was going on. Quite a few young adults, teenagers, adults were showing up in hospital emergency rooms across the country in lung failure, essentially. Eventually, it became clear that that was linked to vaping and predominantly THC, not nicotine products like Juul. But questions were raised about how safe they were and if they were causing these illnesses. So that, in a big way, contributed to the panic.
When Juul and other brands first launched, were they regulated at all? What were the rules around selling nicotine vapes?
When Juul and many e-cigarette companies first started, they were functionally not regulated. And that is because the FDA actually only gained the power to regulate any tobacco product in 2009. And at that time, e-cigarettes were just starting to become a thing, barely existed. And to oversimplify it, the FDA didn't think they were going to be a big deal. So their original tobacco regulations were not tailored to e-cigarettes, were not meant to address this category. And only after products actually started to get popular did regulators realize, oh no, we need to go back and figure out how to regulate these things. But they didn't finish that process until 2016. And at that point, Juul had already been available for a year. Products that came before it had been on the market for 5, 6, 7 years. So it was really a retroactive regulatory process, which is never what you want. You want to assess the safety of things before people are inhaling them into their lungs, not years after. But that, unfortunately, is the way that it played out.
You said that the FDA was kind of trying to retrofit these regulations. What kind of steps did they take once they realized, like, there's this whole other category of product we need to be aware of?
So what they did is in 2016, they put out this policy that said any new e-cigarette product that wanted to be sold in the US would have to go through a really complex process where they put together tons of scientific data and studies. And essentially, they needed to prove on balance that their product offered a benefit to US public health.
So basically helps you quit smoking?
Essentially, that it would help more people stop smoking cigarettes than it would make people start vaping for the first time. So in a really oversimplified way, it's basically pitting the potential benefits for adult smokers against risks like underage use and recreational use of vaping.
How do you even prove that?
Through many, many studies. I mean, these documents that vaping companies have to put together are like multi-100-page applications. Millions of dollars of research go into it. It's everything from epidemiological data about who is actually using your products to scientific studies about the health effects of using them to marketing plans. Like, it is a very robust document that companies had to put together. And the thing to know is these were required proactively for any new companies entering the market. But for companies like Juul that were already selling their products, the FDA gave them a period of several years to put together this document and then file it retroactively. So that's what we are talking about here in the present day, is the results of this analysis that Juul had many years to put together.
Yeah. I mean, in 2022, the FDA denied Juul's application, right? And that resulted in a ban, theoretically, from the market.
Right. At that time, the FDA looked over this huge application that Juul had put together and decided that it had not met this standard of being, on balance, good for U.S. public health. And the main issue that they raised at that time was about the toxicological data.
Like what's in the vape.
Exactly. What's in the vape? Are components of the pods like leaching out and potentially being consumed by people? Are they leading to health risks down the line? At that time, the FDA said there were some inconsistencies in that data such that they could not authorize Juul's products. Very quickly, Juul appealed that decision, put forth a legal challenge, and the FDA agreed to do some additional review and basically pause the ban. So for the last 2 years, Juul products have been available for sale in the US, but in this like regulatory limbo state where the FDA hadn't quite decided what to do with them.
Can we just pause and say how weird that is? The fact that the FDA is like, you're banned, only not yet.
Well, it is crazy. It's wild, but it's also not so different from how the entire e-cigarette category has been regulated for its entire existence. Like most people in the US, I would assume this, think that if you go into a store and buy something, that it's been assessed for safety and that people have a pretty good idea of what it's going to do to your body. When in fact, that has not been the case. It's still not the case for Juul. They have still not made a decision about it. So yes, it's wild that something can be sort of banned and sort of still for sale, but it's also kind of just a continuation of this retroactive regulatory process that they've been in for years.
The FDA also tried other things to kind of hem in e-cigarettes, right? Like in 2020, they banned flavored e-cigarettes.
Yes. So the flavor ban is probably, with the exception of this application process that we're talking about, the biggest regulatory action that the FDA has taken. So what they did is in 2020, and this was after kind of the height of the teen vaping crisis, the FDA decided that for products like Juul, which are reusable and you load them up with little pods of nicotine e-liquid, that those pods, the e-liquid in them, could no longer be flavored. So they could only sell products in tobacco and menthol flavors. And that was an effort to make Juul and products like it less appealing to teenagers.
How important was the flavor to a company like Juul?
It was extremely important to them. They sold, at their height, they had mango, which was their big seller. They had cucumber, they had fruit, they had creme brulee, and flavored pods were 80% of their revenue.
Whoa.
So taking those off the market was a huge, huge thing for a company like Juul.
Okay, so you can sort of see how the FDA is like constricting the way Juul works, like making them apply, restricting the flavors, which is a big part of their business. banning these things technically, although they were also in this limbo. And then last week we have this reversal of the ban. Tell me about the reasoning here. Like, when I read about it, the FDA basically said, we've gained more experience with scientific issues involving e-cigarettes. What the heck does that mean?
Yes. So there's some reading between the lines to be done here. I think in part it just means that they have now looked at millions of these applications and are a little bit better at reading them than perhaps they were a few years ago. But the other really important thing to know is that the FDA has been sued by other companies for its review process. A couple of vaping brands that were denied came forward with a lawsuit that said, hey, you gave us all this information and then you didn't follow the process that you had actually laid out. You just rejected our application on an arbitrary basis. And in January, this past January, judges ruled in their favor and said that the FDA had to reverse those two companies' denials. So basically what the FDA is saying is that there's now this precedent where they have to do additional review, follow the process that they had originally laid out. And it seems that they are now applying that to Juul's situation as well.
Given that the FDA has just ruled that this ban on Juuls is being reversed, do you think people inside Juul, the company, are celebrating right now?
I think if I worked at Juul, it would be too early to totally celebrate because, again, there's nothing to stop the FDA from saying, okay, we reversed the ban, we're restarting scientific review, slap you with a new ban in 6 months from now. Nothing to stop them from doing that. However, they didn't have to do this. They didn't have to rescind the ban. So the fact that they are willing to give Juul that second chance, I think does point to at least a chance that Juul is going to get the outcome it wants.
We'll be right back after a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Discover. When it comes to your finances, Discover wants you to know they are the credit card that is always there for you. With 24/7 U.S.-based live customer service, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We are talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
It's hard to imagine a world where we leave future generations with fewer rights and freedoms. The Supreme Court has stolen the constitutional right to control our bodies. Now politicians in nearly every state have introduced bills that would block people from getting the essential sexual and reproductive care they need, including abortion. Planned Parenthood believes everyone deserves access to care. It's a human right. We won't give up and we won't back down. Help ensure the next generation can decide their own futures. Donate to Planned Parenthood. Visit plannedparenthood.org/future.
It feels to me like the public health panic about Juul and vaping generally has completely fizzled over the course of the last 5 years. What do you think happened here?
Well, I think COVID happened. That was a big thing because the peak of the panic was fall 2019. And then less than a year later, COVID happened and everyone's attention shifted to that. So I do think that is a piece of it. But also the data shows that way fewer teenagers are vaping now than they were in 2019, 2018, that kind of era. I believe, if I have my numbers right, the latest estimate was around 8% of high schoolers said they vape, which is still too high. You want that number to be 0 in an ideal world.
But it was double digits when you started.
Right. It was close to 30% at one time. So if you look at that drop off, there has, been real improvement. And I think that is largely why people are paying less attention now.
Can we talk about Juul as a company? My impression is that while the e-cigarette industry was getting more tightly regulated, this was not great inside Juul. So where does the company stand now?
They are hanging on, but I think their future is incredibly uncertain. For a while, they almost looked too big to fail. They had a valuation of $38 billion. They had a nearly $13 billion investment from Altria, which is the tobacco company that owns Marlboro, among other cigarette brands. And they employed thousands of people. Like, they were a huge, huge company. And then over the years, as they have been, the subject of intense regulatory scrutiny, intense criticism in the press and on Capitol Hill, they have just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. Altria sold its investment, so they're no longer involved. They can't sell the very lucrative flavored pods that I mentioned before. They have been tied up in legal battles. They've been tied up in this FDA situation. So essentially, they are now, what I would say is at a make or break point for the company. Like, if they don't get FDA authorization, and pretty soon, I don't see a super viable path forward for them.
Is Juul still the preferred product for teens?
It's not. Increasingly, teenagers are not using Juul. They are instead using disposable e-cigarettes. It lasts like 200 puffs or something like that, and then you just throw it out when it's empty. And what's interesting is disposables were not popular at the height of Juul's popularity. So when the FDA banned flavored Juul cartridges, they didn't include disposables in that regulation.
So an opening there.
Yeah, exactly. So they took advantage of that loophole. Not Juul. Other companies took advantage of that loophole. And now the market is dominated by these flavored disposable products, which are not technically legal, but the FDA has not really cracked down on, and you can still find them everywhere. And those are what teenagers are increasingly using.
I'm a little confused about how a product is illegal, but still being sold openly.
It is confusing. It is a real flaw in the US regulatory system. When I say they're sold illegally, I mean that they have not gone through this super onerous application process that Juul has been dealing with for the last few years. So they are not authorized by the FDA. Many are just imported from overseas and have not gone through the regulatory process at all. But essentially, the market is so big that the FDA has not been able to really rein it in, especially because, as I mentioned, so many are imported from overseas. So occasionally you'll see the FDA issue a warning letter against a company or do some kind of crackdown on retailers, but new brands just keep popping up all the time. It's like a game of whack-a-mole.
Is it possible that the FDA made vaping worse? They went all in on regulating a company like Juul, but that didn't actually eliminate the e-cigarette problem. Like, fewer people are vaping. I guess you could say that's a success. But if you're not actually regulating the vapes that are now popular, I don't know how you can say you're fully doing your job.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it is a huge, huge problem that the FDA always seems to be a few steps behind. Like, industry is really charting the course of vaping in the US right now. It is not the regulators who are out in front. And I think we're now, sort of to your point, in this really interesting situation where increasingly the products that are popular are those that have gone through the least scientific review and scientific oversight. Like, again, I would never recommend that anybody pick up a vaping habit just for fun. But if somebody in my life came to me and was like, hey, I really think that vaping will help me quit smoking, which brand should I choose? I would point them towards one that the FDA has at least, reviewed the scientific data for, which is not these flavored disposables that are all over the market.
Yeah, I kind of get the sense from reading your writing that you think Juul is the least bad option, or certainly one of them when it comes to e-cigarettes.
It's above my pay grade to make that decision. But what I would say is at least Juul has conducted scientific studies because they've had to. They've submitted those to the FDA. And the FDA has at least read through that data and said, there is not, some urgent health crisis that we see brewing after reading this data. Whereas for some of the companies out there, it's anyone's guess what's in there and what it's doing to health.
I wonder if telling the story of Juul left you with a different kind of understanding of how regulation works in this country, maybe especially at the FDA, like what works and what doesn't.
Absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned before, I was somewhat naive as a consumer, I guess, before I started covering this beat, because if you had asked me before I started writing about Juul, hey, is this product that's sold in like every convenience store in your neighborhood, is that regulated? Does somebody know what it's going to do to your body? I would have said, of course, because it's available in every convenience store in my neighborhood. But after covering Juul in depth for years, I've really seen that that's not necessarily the case. And it's not limited to vaping products. I actually just did a story about some of the holes in regulations for like cosmetics and personal care products. A lot of those don't go through the amount of review that you would assume they do. So I think taken together, it really just points to the fact that our regulatory system is, by and large, reactive rather than proactive. It is designed to look for problems in products that are already on the market and respond to those rather than stopping problems before they exist.
Jamie, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jamie Ducharme is a health correspondent at Time and the author of Big Vape, The Incendiary Rise of Juul. That's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.
We are audiostack.ai.
Combining AI writing, the best synthetic voices,
with production and delivery.
Be it ads, podcasts, or VOs for video.
Just like this ad.
How would you utilize AI audio? For free.
Go to audiostack.ai/contest.
Give us just a few details.
And you could replace this spot and be heard by millions.
See webpage for T's and C's. audiostack.ai/contest.